The girl's footprints disappeared at the edge of the marketplace. One moment, she had been helping her mother arrange mangoes into neat pyramids. The next, vanished into the air like morning mist over the mountains. In the days that followed, more children would disappear from towns across Ecuador, Peru, and Colombia. Small shadows swallowed by a darkness that moved with terrible purpose through the highlands of South America. Behind these disappearances stalked a man whose childhood had been shattered like glass, whose soul had been twisted into something unrecognizable. His name was Pedro Lopez, and in the quiet villages nestled among the Andean peaks, he would earn a title that still echoes through the valleys: the Monster of the Andes. Born on October 8, 1948, in Santa Isabel, Colombia, Pedro Alonso Lopez entered the world already marked by violence. His father, Medardo Reyes, was killed during the period of civil unrest known as La Violencia, 6 months before Pedro's birth. The shadow of this absence would loom large over the boy's early years, creating a void that would never be filled. Lopez was the 7th of 13 children born to Benilda Lopez de Castañeda. Though his mother worked hard as a laundress, Lopez would later claim she was also a prostitute whose household was a storm of violence and neglect. Whether true or embellished through the lens of his later justifications, what is certain is that his childhood home offered little sanctuary. The breaking point came when Lopez was just 8 years old. His mother discovered him attempting to molest his younger sister and cast him out into the streets, severing what tenuous connection to family he had left. The boy found himself alone in the unforgiving landscape of Colombian streets, where survival meant learning the brutal language of violence. Days stretched into months, then years. Lopez drifted through Colombia's urban underworld, sleeping in alleyways and abandoned buildings. He survived through petty theft and the occasional kindness of strangers. But the streets had their own education to offer, and it was a curriculum written in blood and betrayal. When Lopez was 11, a man approached him with an offer of food and shelter. Hungry and desperate, the boy followed, only to be violently assaulted. This traumatic experience carved new pathways in his mind, redirecting whatever capacity for empathy he might have possessed towards something darker, a simmering rage that would eventually boil over into unspeakable violence. By his late teens, Lopez had graduated from street urchin to petty criminal. His first formal introduction to the justice system came after a failed car theft attempt landed him in prison. Inside those walls, violence was currency, and Lopez paid his dues in blood, both his own and others. While incarcerated, Lopez claimed he was gang raped by 4 older inmates. Whatever fragile sense of self remained after his brutal childhood shattered completely in that moment. As he would later recount to interviewers, something fundamental broke inside him. The assault crystallized his hatred, particularly toward women, whom he blamed for his suffering. From his mother's abandonment to the feminine aspects he perceived in his male attackers. Upon his release in 1978, a newly forged Pedro Lopez emerged, no longer merely surviving, but hunting. He began wandering the northwestern regions of South America, a nomadic predator crossing porous borders with impunity. He later claimed that during this period he killed over 100 girls, mainly targeting indigenous street children whose disappearances would raise few alarms in official circles. What makes Lopez unique among serial killers is not just the staggering number of his victims, but the eerie calm with which he conducted his spree. Unlike many killers who operate in frenzied bursts, Lopez killed with methodical precision, a terrible machine whose only function was death. From Colombia to Peru to Ecuador, Lopez refined his technique to an art form of evil. His hunting grounds were typically busy marketplaces, where the chaos and noise provided perfect cover. There, he would seek out young girls, usually between 8 and 12 years old, who had strayed momentarily from parental supervision. With disarming charm and the promise of small trinkets or sweets, Lopez would lure his victims away from safety. "I became a hunter of girls," he reportedly told investigators later. It was like hunting delicious little birds. His preferred time was dawn, when the early morning fog cloaked his movements, and when many young girls in rural areas would leave home unaccompanied to fetch water or attend school. In the misty half-light, Lopez would emerge from the shadows with practiced ease, a predator perfectly adapted to his environment. Perhaps most disturbing of all his practices was what came after death. Lopez admitted to occasionally exhuming his victims' bodies to have what he termed tea parties with them. This macabre ritual suggests a desire for companionship that his violence had made impossible in life, a twisted attempt to create the family connections he had been denied. When finally captured and questioned about his motivation, Lopez offered a chilling insight into his psychology. "I lost my innocence at the age of 8, he told investigators. So I decided to do the same to as many girls as I could. This simple statement reveals a mind locked in a cycle of perpetual vengeance against innocence itself. In rare interviews, Lopez displayed the flat affect and lack of remorse typical of psychopaths. He viewed his victims not as human beings, but as symbols of a purity he could never reclaim. Objects to be destroyed in his personal war against the world that had destroyed him. What makes his case particularly haunting is how Lopez moved through society virtually unseen, despite the enormity of his crimes. Like the Andean fog that often shrouded his movements, he seemed to exist in a parallel dimension, visible only in the wake of destruction he left behind. Lopez might have continued his killing spree indefinitely had it not been for a near miss and a stroke of catastrophic luck. In April 1980, flash flooding struck the areas surrounding Ambato, Ecuador, unearthing the remains of several young girls who had been reported missing. The discovery forced authorities to reconsider the pattern of disappearances they had previously attributed to human trafficking. The break in the case came shortly after the floods. A local woman named Carvina Poveda was heading to market with her 12-year-old daughter Marie when Lopez attempted to abduct the girl. Local merchants intervened, overpowering Lopez and holding him until police arrived. At first, Lopez remained silent in custody, but eventually opened up to Captain Pastor Cordova, who had been placed in Lopez's cell, posing as a fellow prisoner. With chilling pride, Lopez boasted, "Over 200 in Ecuador, some tens in Peru, and many more in Colombia." He then led authorities to the burial sites of 53 of his victims. Forensic excavations ultimately confirmed a minimum of 110 murders, though Lopez himself claimed the total was closer to 300. The number, if true, would make him one of the most prolific serial killers in recorded history. Despite the scale of his crimes, the justice system's response proved dismally inadequate. In 1980, Lopez was convicted of murder and sentenced to 16 years in prison, the maximum sentence available under Ecuadorian law at that time. More disturbing still, he received a 2-year reduction for good behavior. Upon his release in 1994, Lopez was deported to Colombia, where he was briefly detained as an illegal immigrant before being handed over to Colombian authorities. Prosecutors there were unable to build a new case against him. Instead, he was declared insane and committed to a psychiatric hospital. In an interview before his release, Lopez displayed breathtaking narcissism, describing himself as the man of the century, and noting with satisfaction that he was being released for good behavior. The irony of such a statement from a man who had snuffed out more than 100 young lives seems to have escaped him entirely. The final act in Lopez's story remains unwritten. In 1998, he was declared sane and released on $70 bail on the condition that he would report periodically to authorities. He almost immediately disappeared. The last confirmed sighting came in September 1999, when he visited the National Civil Registry to renew his identification card. The most terrifying thought isn't that such a monster once existed, but that he might still be out there, watching from the shadows as a child's footprints lead away from safety, never to return.